breaking news coming in at this hour. Pakistan's High Commissioner to India, Sohail Mahmood, has been called back to Pakistan for consultation after a harassment incident that he's alleged in New Delhi. That's the big story we're breaking this hour on WION. We're waiting for more details. Remember, Pakistan has leveled allegations against India in the past couple of weeks, saying that India has continually been harassing its diplomats in New Delhi. In the latest in that diplomatic war, Pakistan's High Commissioner to the country, Sohail Mahmood, has now been called back to Islamabad for further consultations on what exactly has transpired. This after the alleged harassment of the Pakistani High Commissioner in New Delhi. Now this comes, remember, after Mr. Mahmood had called for quote-unquote sober reflection on the situation pertaining to diplomats in India. Now, the Pakistani media, remember, has been reporting the incidents of alleged harassment of Pakistani diplomats in India. And, of course, India has the same allegations against Pakistan. But the High Commissioner, Sohail Mahmood, has now been called back to Pakistan. Before doing so, though, he did call for quote-unquote sober reflection and a careful handling of the situation. Now, I'm quoting him now. This is what he told the Hindu newspaper. This is a moment for sober reflection on the state of the bilateral relationship. It is too important to be allowed to drift. There is a need to handle matters with wisdom and thoughtfulness. End quote. This is the statement that Mr. Mahmood made to a newspaper in India. But latest reports now telling us that he's been called back to Islamabad for consultations. Whether this is a temporary change of the status quo or a more permanent feature, we're going to have to wait and watch on more developments as far as that goes. But these protests came from the Pakistani High Commission. There was apparently a video that was taken by one of the embassy officials saying that their car was being tailed or followed by men on motorcycles, and that this was one of the alleged harassment incidents against Pakistan's embassy officials here in India. Now, the latest as far as that sparring between the two countries go, Pakistan has decided to pull back, or rather call back, its envoy to India for consultations to Islamabad. Now, it's quite understood that surveillance is a common feature in many countries as far as diplomats go. India and Pakistan are anything but long-lost friends. So there have been incidents like this reported in the past. But the escalation of this diplomatic spat has now taken on a whole other hue, with Pakistan deciding to call back its envoy to Islamabad. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are initial reports. We're waiting for more confirmation on the details of his return. Is this a temporary change of the status quo? Is this a more permanent feature? We're waiting to hear more. Let me go across to WION's international correspondent, Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining me from the newsroom for more on that story. Ramesh, definite uptick in tensions. Give us more on this latest information.
Well, Aisha, this is what we know so far. Sources are telling WION that Pakistan High Commissioner to New Delhi, Sohail Mahmood, has been called back to headquarters for consultations. This, by the way, is standard practice in diplomacy. When tensions rise or some outstanding differences arise, the High Commissioners and ambassadors are called back to the headquarters for consultation. We are given to understand that Sohail Mahmood has been called back to Islamabad for consultations, especially in the light of recent disturbances in the ties, especially in light of the alleged harassment of Pakistani diplomats posted here in New Delhi.
Right. And Ramesh, just for our understanding, you said that this is a common practice in diplomacy. But given the ties between India and Pakistan and the low points that we've seen in that diplomatic or let's say bilateral relationship, how many times has this happened in the past?
Well, we've seen that happen many an occasion in the past. India-Pakistan history is replete with such instances, Aisha. But just to clarify for the benefit of viewers who might just be tuning in, the High Commissioner of Pakistan to India has not been recalled. he is still very much the High Commissioner of Pakistan to India. He has only been called back to Islamabad for consultations in light of recent incidences of alleged harassment of Pakistani diplomats posted here in New Delhi.
Right.
This, by the way, India has denied, saying that Indian diplomats posted in Pakistan have also been facing similar cases for the last month and more, especially the tailing of the High Commissioner of India's vehicle in Islamabad and harassment of the employees and diplomats posted there, including the service providers who are facilitating water and electricity connections at the premises and properties of the Indian High Commission in Pakistan.
Right. Stay with me a while longer, Ramesh. Strategic analyst Sushant Sareen joining me on the phone line as well. Sushant, good afternoon. Thanks for speaking with us. Make sense of this development for us. Was it perhaps along expected lines, given the sort of rhetoric we've been hearing on this alleged harassment of Pakistani embassy officials in India?
So I don't know what the Pakistanis are cribbing about. It's been, ever since Pakistan has come into existence, it's been a quest for the Pakistanis to have parity with India, and they've always insisted on reciprocity. Now, for so much time, the Indians have not reciprocated with the kind of shabby and scandalous treatment which is meted out to Indian diplomats in Islamabad. So if now the Pakistani diplomats in New Delhi are getting a taste of their own medicine, I don't see why they should be cribbing. This is reciprocity. They should welcome it. I don't know what's the problem.
All right. I know that you've also been engaging with people who've been having this argument on Twitter. But can I ask you, Sushant, also, India at the Human Rights Council recently has once again raised concerns about Pakistan giving it lessons in democracy. And, of course, this comes on the back of the Milli Muslim League receiving legal sanction in Pakistan. Do you think these are perhaps diversionary tactics as well by Islamabad?
No, I wouldn't call them diversionary tactics. See, the point is that these are parallel streams. The harassment of Indian diplomats has been happening for the last so many decades. In fact, there are innumerable stories. And what happened was that the Indian diplomats had more or less internalized it. They had kind of factored it in that this is how the Pakistanis will behave. Until and unless they crossed a certain red line, which was to beat up a diplomat or something, there wasn't any reciprocity from the Indian side. But clearly, the harassment and intimidation of Indian diplomats must have crossed certain red lines, which is why the similar treatment is now being given to the Pakistanis out here. But this is something which they are doing on a parallel track. This is something which they've been doing for years on end. They've been sponsoring terror groups also for years on end. So both things have been moving in parallel. I think to make a connection between the two probably would not be entirely correct.
Fair enough. How do you think India is going to or should respond to this development, though?
I think we will respond in the way the Pakistanis normally respond. We will flatly deny anything like this has happened. But the message to the Pakistanis will be very clear that if you don't behave yourself with our diplomats in Islamabad, then please don't expect that, there will be kid glove treatment which will be meted out to your diplomats in New Delhi. This is what happens when it is matters of spying. This is what happens when it is matters of misbehavior by the Pakistani side against Indian diplomats. So I think that is par for the course, which is precisely what needs to be done, because how else do you deliver the message? There have been instances where they have aggressively entered the house of Indian diplomats. They have orchestrated robberies in the houses of Indian diplomats. They have harassed their families and children in Islamabad, and the Indians have taken it, in their stride. But clearly, the cup of patience is filling over, and the Pakistanis are being given a taste of their own medicine now. This has to be done, because I have myself witnessed that if you go to, I was once at a dinner at the house of an Indian diplomat in Islamabad. He was going to drop me, and there were two cars of these Pakistani spooks which had actually blocked the gate of his house. Now, this guy was an intrepid diplomat, and he just, stepped on the pedal almost as if he was going to hit those two cars, and last minute they moved away. Now, this is the kind of stuff which the Indian diplomats have taken in their stride.
Right.
The Pakistani diplomats, however, have to now start getting used to it. If their masters in Rawalpindi and in Appara, the ISI headquarters, do not understand normal civilized behavior, then I'm afraid they will be given the same treatment out here.
Right. Stay with me a second, Sushant. For viewers just joining us, these are visuals on your screen of Sohail Mahmood. He is Pakistan's High Commissioner to India, who's been called back for consultations to Islamabad. Sushant, before I let you go, speaking of Mr. Mahmood, very recently he's made certain statements to press in India saying that the current approach and methods only go against diplomatic efforts. He's also called for sober reflection. Do you think that these rather tame comments from the High Commissioner belie something completely different, given that Islamabad's decided to call him back for quote-unquote consultations?
No, I think the current High Commissioner enjoys a very good reputation. He's supposed to be a very decent man, unlike his predecessor. And if you look at the predecessor's television programs these days, you will know that was the normal template of officers who used to be sent out here, the most obnoxious characters. He seems to be, not cut from the same cloth. And he seems to be quite different. He's also trying to do certain things. Unfortunately, the people who pull his strings and give him orders are probably not going to be on the same page as him. And the government or the people who appointed him as High Commissioner out here are virtually not in power in any meaningful way in Islamabad. So how much he can actually do to actually try and improve relations between the two countries, I think there's a very big question mark. Having said that, I think the point which he makes is unexceptionable. If you're going to have diplomatic relations, howsoever bad or otherwise your relationship might be at the political level, there is a certain decorum which needs to be maintained on how diplomats have to be treated in each other's countries. But if one side is going to violate that decorum, then it cannot expect, any different treatment from the other side when it comes to their own diplomats. If he goes back and during his consultations he's able to convince his masters that this is not the sensible thing to do, then perhaps we will see at the end of this particular episode. Otherwise, it will continue to snowball into something bigger and bigger, and you might ultimately see, the Indian diplomats have already pulled out their families from Islamabad. The Pakistanis, if they do the same, I don't think heavens will fall. And there is a possibility that the sizes of the two missions might start getting cut down. Now, if that is the way we have to go, then that is the way we will go.
All right. So, Shant Sareen, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and sharing your perspective with us on a developing story, one that we are tracking here on WION. Just for viewers joining in, a quick recap on developments that have happened very quickly in the last half an hour or so. Pakistan's High Commissioner to India, Sohail Mahmood, has been called back to Pakistan for consultation. This after alleged harassment incidents of embassy officials in New Delhi. Ramesh Ramachandran, my colleague, continues to be with us on the broadcast. Before I do that, though, a quick look at some of the statements that have been made as far as this entire incident goes. Pakistan's Foreign Office has issued a statement saying, I quote, Pakistan calls back High Commissioner to Pakistan for meetings and way forward following acts of harassment against its diplomats in Delhi. Sohail Mahmood to return after meeting and devising way forward with all stakeholders. End quote. So that's the statement that Pakistan's Foreign Office has issued with regards to the return of Pakistan's High Commissioner to New Delhi. He's been called back to Islamabad to carry out quote-unquote consultations and to figure out a way forward following these alleged incidents of harassment against Pakistani embassy officials in India. Let me go back to my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who continues to be with us on the broadcast. Ramesh, there's been so much, sparring between India and Pakistan over the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, and of course, repeated cross-border violations along the line of control. Does this latest incident only sort of, push that narrative a little forward? And how do you perceive this is going to, go ahead? Is this going to snowball into something bigger, as Sushant Sareen was saying a little while earlier?
Aisha, just a couple of quick points. One, Pakistan might have brought it upon itself by indulging in harassment of diplomats, Indian diplomats posted in Pakistan. Remember, India said the first instance in this episode can be traced back to the 15th of February last month, when the High Commissioner's vehicle was intervened and accosted and affronted by their security agencies, and the service providers at the High Commission in Islamabad were, the people were asked to leave. Those people who were providing electricity and water connection were also asked to go. So clearly this has been building up. So in a sense, Pakistan is very much responsible for allowing situation to come to such a pass. Number one. Number two, if you look at the India-Pakistan checkered history, this is nothing unusual. This is more or less par for the course. But that said, anything could be a trigger. This could well be a slippery slope from which the relationship cannot be salvaged going forward. So at the moment, as things stand, the High Commissioner of Pakistan has been called back to headquarters for consultations. We don't yet know as to how that might pan out, but the expectation, at least in India, is that this can be handled in a more mature way, reasoned way. Instead of Pakistan going to the media with videos and photographs of the alleged harassment of the diplomats, this could have been handled diplomatically, behind the scenes, as it were, in a more mature fashion. That said, the High Commissioner of Pakistan has spoken to the Indian media, section of the Indian media yesterday, saying that this called for a rethink in India's relations with Pakistan, and he said that it's called for a sobering thought on both sides on how to proceed from here onwards.
Right. Stay with me a second longer, Ramesh. Got a couple of follow-up questions for you as well. Before I do that, let's quickly bring our viewers up to speed with the developments with the former Foreign Secretary Shashank is joining me on the phone line right now for more on the story. Mr. Shashank, thank you so much for speaking with us here at WION. Just to set the ball rolling on this conversation, how do you perceive this development as far as Islamabad goes, its decision to call back Sohail Mahmood after these alleged incidents of harassment?
It's rather surprising because the harassment was first reported by the Indian envoy in Pakistan, and then Pakistan talked about similar incidents against their envoys in India. Therefore, it seems to be some kind of a reaction in the first instance, and then Pakistan has taken the lead, and they have decided to move strongly away from any kind of a possibility of normal relations with India. So they are reducing the level of their envoy. After all, calling back the ambassador when we are trying to be in a Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the next month or two, where we'll be discussing issues relating to terrorism, etc. I think it seems to be something to do with various other issues they are handling with China, with Iran, with the United States, that they feel that now within their public perception, the blame should be put on the Indo-Pak relations rather than any of their other friends.
So you see this as the outcome of perhaps continued scrutiny, perhaps sharper scrutiny of Pakistan and its woeful record when it comes to tackling terror. Do you think India's continued pressure on international bodies, on international allies to bring Pakistan to book could be one of the reasons that we're seeing this sort of fallout in New Delhi today?
Well, the immediate reason, I can only say that yes, Rex Tillerson has gone in the United States, and the new Secretary of State who has taken over, in his very first statement, he talked about Pakistan not doing enough on terrorism. So, but he has also left the way open that in case Pakistan can change the ways, and then of course cooperation is possible. But obviously Pakistan wants to put all the blame on the Indo-Pak relations, and that India is putting pressure on other countries. India is just doing whatever is required to be done. To whenever people ask India about India's experience of terrorism-related incidents from Pakistan, so we just give factual answers. I don't think it's a question that India is out on a campaign against Pakistan.
All right. Stay with me a while longer, Mr. Shashank. Ambassador Vivek Kaju is also with us on the broadcast. Ambassador Kaju, thanks for speaking with us. We'll come to you in just a second. In the meantime, my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran has a question for Mr. Shashank.
Right. Ambassador Shashank, please stay on, if you will. I want to take that question across to Ambassador Karju. Ambassador Karju, now you've been a diplomat for 3 decades and more. Could Pakistan not have handled this present crisis, instant crisis, a little more in a mature fashion? Why did Pakistan have to go out to the media with the videos and photographs of the so-called alleged harassment when Pakistan itself brought it upon himself by attacking and obstructing the movement of the Indian diplomats posted in Pakistan?
I think you and your viewers should know the background to all this. Pakistan has traditionally treated Indian diplomats very, very poorly. It has a policy, its agencies have a policy of intimidating Indian diplomats especially. The purpose is to ensure that they are demoralized, that they don't perform their professional duties fully, to curtail their legitimate contacts, and also to ensure that Pakistani nationals know that meeting Indian diplomats is a dangerous thing. That is why their surveillance is in your face. It is not only with Indian diplomats, it's also with Indian officials who visit Pakistan. So this is something that is there. The Indian side India has always taken a mature view of this and has never taken it to the media. It's tried to ensure that all this is kept out of the public eye, which I have often felt was short-sighted, that we should have not accepted the harassment of our diplomats as a routine matter. Now, the other point is that the world of diplomacy functions on reciprocity. So if diplomats of one country are being harassed, then the other country has to take strong action to ensure that the message will go home effectively. Now, the third point is that traditionally Pakistan has felt that if it allows these things to get into the Indian media, somehow people in India feel that India should take the moral high ground and not adopt the same practices as the Pakistani agencies do. So the pressure, ironically, is on India and on Indian diplomats. I'm happy that the government this time is really behaving in a manner that is based on reciprocity, and that I, for one, do not bother about Pakistanis recalling their man for consultations, their High Commissioner for consultation.
Right.
They have started it. They do it all the time, and I think Foreign Secretary Shashank would well know this, and he will endorse what I'm saying.
Right, Ambassador Karju and Ambassador Shashank, do stay on. We're now joined by Ambassador Arun K. Singh, who joins us on the phone line from New Delhi. Ambassador Singh, good to have you back on WION. Now, we're discussing with Ambassador Karju and Ambassador Shashank about the latest crisis to hit India-Pakistan ties, namely the Pakistani High Commissioner being called back to Islamabad for consultations. Now, your initial reactions as to where this might all lead to?
So I didn't hear what Foreign Secretary Mr. Shashank had said, but I did hear what my friend and colleague Ambassador Karju had to comment. And I broadly agree with what he has said. At one level, things like this have happened before. I recall way back in around 2002, 2003, there had been a similar, although not exactly the same, escalation when the harassment that our diplomats were subjected to in Islamabad had gone beyond all proportions. At one level, they are constantly subjected to oppressive surveillance, to harassment, their families, their children on several occasions. And as Ambassador Karju said, in India, we don't quite do it the same way. We are a different society. We are a much more open society. And the Pakistani diplomats in India have a completely different experience. But I think sometimes things go beyond a certain level. And although I'm not aware of exactly the facts here, and the government of India has not confirmed, but according to media reports, there has been an element of retaliation and reciprocity brought in here, which would have surprised the Pakistanis, because they don't expect this. And from what I recall, something like this has not happened for almost 15 years in the kind of treatment that is done. And I believe that recently the matters went beyond proportion in Islamabad when they intervened in the construction of some residence that we were doing for our diplomats, and intervened with that process and, cut off water supply, electricity, sort of harassed the contractors there. So things did get a bit out of hand. So given that, if Pakistan wants to signal that it is concerned and wants to signal that it is calling its High Commissioner back for consultation, be that as it may, I don't think we should read too much into that. We should essentially see that the relationship between the two countries, including in the manner of conduct of diplomacy, is not at a very happy place, but we have to manage it in a certain way while preserving our interests. So I think Pakistan is just signaling to its own audience, to others in India who may want to ask the government of India to scale down a bit, perhaps to the international community that things are a bit not fully under control here. But I think beyond that, one shouldn't really read too much into this.
Right. Ambassador Singh, do stay on. I want to go back one more time to Ambassador Shashank. Ambassador Shashank, if you're still with us. Now, India says in a reaction to media reports from in the Pakistani media that all of this can be traced back to mid-February, when the Indian High Commissioner's vehicle was similarly intervened and accosted by the Pakistani agencies. Not only that, as Ambassador Kaju and Ambassador Singh were mentioning, that service providers, electricity and water connections were disrupted at the Indian High Commission in Islamabad, and also their family and friends were tailed and intimidated on many an occasion. Now, you think these are just deserts for the Pakistani actions and provocations? That India is retaliating to the provocation that Pakistan is in the first place, and therefore Pakistan cannot now cry foul or cry victim?
No, first thing is that the Pakistanis carry out these instigations in order to see that what will be the Indian reaction. And in case the Indians try to be calm and take a more rational view that maybe this is some people who have been out of control of the government of Pakistan who are carrying out these things on their own. So then they give them a possibility of a way out. But then Pakistan continues. And finally, when there is a reciprocal action, then Pakistanis say, oh, they cry foul and they want to call back. But I think it's only consultation. So let us wait whether it's only consultation, because 23rd of March, the High Commissioner has already invited a large number of people for the National Day of Pakistan. So we'll have to see whether they are carrying on once again as usual, or they want to convey to their friends abroad and the Pakistani people that nothing is normal between India and Pakistan, something is going seriously wrong. And above everything else, as I said, that they are under pressure from the Americans first, and then the Chinese and the Arabs also, and the Iranians. So I think they want to pass on all that blame to India, that India is instigating everyone else. Whereas, as I said, that India is only responding to whatever one asks, how is the Indian experience of terrorism from Pakistan. So India would just give a rational reply and give the facts.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that, gentlemen. Thank you all for sharing your perspective with us, Ambassadors Shashank, Kaju and Arun Singh, and of course my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran. Appreciate you giving us your individual perspectives on this developing story. It's time